The dust of Verkivka was a constant thing, a fine ghostly powder that coated everything. The skeletal remains of buildings, the broken paving stones, and the heavy heart of Alina Petrov. Verkivka, once a bustling hub of industry and laughter, was now a town defined by silence and scars. It was here, in the cold shadow of a collapsed apartment block, that Alina found her purpose. Alina adjusted the scarf wrapped around her hair, her hands, rough and stained with turpentine, tracing the outline of a window frame. The frame belonged to the annex of the old Verkivka Community Hall, a small structure that had miraculously survived the worst of the shelling, though its roof was perforated like old lace and its central hearth was choked with debris. Her husband, Maxim, had been a builder, a man who saw blueprints where others saw chaos. He had also been an artist, filling notebooks with sketches of the life he loved before he joined the defense forces. Maxim had died 6 months ago defending the supply lines just south of the town, leaving Alina with only his worn box of oil paints and the deafening echo of his absence. Grief was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Alina fought it with a hammer. The neighbors who remained, mostly the old and the deeply stubborn, thought she was losing her mind. "Alina, darling, why sweep the dust just for more dust to settle?" asked Mrs. Collett, her voice etched with decades of weariness. "Because," Alina replied, pushing a cart full of broken glass shards, "dust is only manageable if it is disturbed." She wasn't just cleaning, she was performing an act of defiance. This annex, soon to be called Palitra Nadii, the Palette of Hope, would be an art school for the town's children. The idea was audacious, perhaps reckless. Who needed paint and paper when they needed food, heat, and stable walls? Alina believed they needed the color most of all. They needed a place where the shapes they drew weren't always of fortifications or explosions. The first student she encountered was Ivy. Ivy was 16, too old to be a child, too young to carry the hardened resignation that settled around her eyes. She wore a thick, faded jacket and walked with a tense, fast stride of someone who expected danger around every corner. Alina found her sitting on the curb near the ruined town market, meticulously sketching something on a scrap of cardboard. "That's good work," Alina said, stopping beside her. Ivy didn't look up. "It's just trash." The drawing was a rendering of a blown-out transmission tower, the metal beams twisted into a terrifying, skeletal flower against a gray sky. It was technically perfect, raw and disturbing. "It is powerful," Alina corrected. "We are starting an art school. Just a few rooms, we are cleaning them now. Will you come?" Ivy finally looked up, her gaze steady and sharp. "Why? So we can paint happy little daisies?" "That's insulting, Alina Petrov. The world burned. Painting doesn't change the charcoal smell." Alina sat down beside her, ignoring the cold. "No, it doesn't change the smell. But perhaps painting gives you a safer place to put the charcoal. Maxim, my husband, he always said, art is not decoration, it is the visualization of survival." "Come. Help me visualize." Ivy hesitated for a long time. She was a teenager who had lost her home, her older brother, and all her certainties. She had mastered the art of survival by building emotional walls thicker than any fortress. "I'll come help you clean," Ivy finally conceded. "But I won't paint flowers." Alina smiled a tired but genuine smile. "Bring your charcoal. We need the darkness to appreciate the light." Ivy became the backbone of the physical cleanup. She was fiercely strong, practical, and efficient. She didn't paint, but she scrubbed soot from the walls and polished the salvaged communal table until it gleamed despite the rough wood. The second student was Sage. Sage was 13, small for her age, and perpetually quiet. Her silence wasn't defiant like Ivy's, it was protective. Her parents had moved to the safer West months ago, but Sage had insisted on staying with her grandmother, afraid of being too far from the spot where she last saw her favorite toy, a gesture that symbolized her desperate need to hold on to the last intact memories of her old life. Alina found Sage hiding nearly every afternoon in the deep alcove of the damaged hall, clutching a worn, thin sketchbook. Unlike Ivy's brutal realism, Sage drew only birds. Thousands of them, flying, soaring, hiding in nests, always painted in impossibly bright shades of blue and orange. When Alina invited her, Sage didn't speak a word, but she nodded instantly, clutching her sketchbook tighter. Soon, there were 8 students. A handful of children aged 8 to 16, all carrying similar burdens: anxiety, loss, and the heavy awareness of living in a perpetual state of emergency. The Palette of Hope officially opened on a frost-tinged October afternoon. Alina had managed to secure a small, sputtering generator that provided a few hours of weak light and heat. The room was sparse: a salvaged blackboard, cans of Maxim's old paint, some hardened but most salvageable, and stacks of paper provided by a tiny aid convoy. "Welcome," Alina said simply, standing by the newly swept hearth. We are not here to forget. We are here to remember what is worth saving. The first few weeks were a struggle against the pervasive gloom. The light from the broken windows was often weak, and the children tended to gravitate toward muted colors, muddy greens, heavy grays, and black. Sage, initially, couldn't bring herself to use the paints. She watched the others, her hands hovering over the pots, before retreating back to her sketchbook and her familiar frantic birds. Ivy, true to her word, used only black charcoal. She drew the ruins of Verkivka, but not just the buildings. She drew the spirit of the ruin, the jagged edges, the emptiness, the feeling of being trapped. Her art was so skilled and so bleak that it often silenced the room. One day, Alina walked over to Ivy's table. Ivy was sketching a tank tread mark impressed in the mud, rendering the heavy texture perfectly. Ivy, Alina said softly. You draw what you see, and you see the truth of what happened. That takes courage. But the world is not just what is destroyed. It is what survives. Where is the green shoot pushing through the concrete? Where is the sunset breaking the smoke? Ivy slammed the charcoal stick down. There is no green shoot. Only the tank mark. If I pretend to see sunsets, I am lying. I don't lie. No, Alina agreed. You don't lie. But you are only telling half the truth. The world is also you, sitting here drawing, refusing to quit. That resilience is a color, Ivy. It is a brilliant, stubborn gold. Alina picked up a jar of thick, vibrant yellow oil paint, Maxim's favorite, and placed it gently beside Ivy's charcoal. Show me the stubborn gold, even if it is only flecks of light reflecting off the broken glass. That evening, the generator sputtered and died earlier than usual, plunging the annex into darkness. Panic immediately flared among the younger children. Alina fumbled for the salvaged kerosene lamp. It's all right, children. It's only the machine that has tired. In the sudden heavy silence, a small, thin sound began. Sage was singing. Not a song with words, but a soft humming melody that seemed to rise from deep within her chest. Then, she started to draw. She couldn't see, but she didn't need to. She held a thick piece of chalk and drew on the blackboard, guided purely by feel. When Alina finally managed to light the lamp, its warm yellow glow illuminated Sage's creation. Instead of birds, Sage had drawn a massive, intricate flower, its petals protective and wide, covering the entire blackboard. In the center of the flower, she had drawn a tiny, bright yellow sun, the color of perseverance. The spell was broken. Ivy picked up the yellow paint, the stubborn gold, and without warning, she dabbed two small, perfect spheres of light onto the black tank tread drawing. She didn't try to hide them. They were headlights. Headlights cutting through the darkness, moving forward. The truth, Ivy mumbled, her voice thick, is that we are still moving. As winter deepened, the palette of hope became an essential anchor. Children trudged through the snow and mud, past the ruins that had become commonplace, toward the weak light of the annex. They stopped painting simply what they saw and started painting what they intended to build. They painted gardens where there were craters. They painted restored roofs instead of shattered timbers. Alina, watching them, felt her own heavy grief begin to shift. The weight hadn't vanished, but it had transmuted into kinetic energy. Maxim's voice, which had been a painful memory, became a powerful directive. The children decided they could not keep their hope confined to the small annex. We need to paint something big, Ivy announced one cold afternoon. Something outside. Something that people can see from the road. They chose the wall of the old flour mill, a huge sprawling section of brick that had survived intact but was covered in a depressing blanket of soot and shrapnel scars. Alina was initially hesitant. Drawing on public buildings, even ruined ones, felt risky, but the children's enthusiasm was contagious. We need color, Sage whispered, now speaking a few tentative words. A lot of color. Like the birds. The project became the town's focus. Using scavenged ladders, brushes made from bundled horsehair, and every last drop of precious paint, they began their mural. Alina provided the guidance, but Ivy dictated the design. It was not a landscape of idealized perfection. Ivy ensured the scars of the wall remained visible, incorporating the bullet holes and heat damage into the composition. She directed the others to paint a vibrant, powerful scene, a massive oak tree rising from the ashes, its roots anchored in the destroyed foundations of the town. The trunk was dark and scarred, representing the past trauma, but its branches exploded outward in a riot of color. The vibrant blues and oranges that Sage specialized in, the stubborn gold that Ivy had finally embraced, and soft, welcoming greens painted by the younger students. The centerpiece was the trunk itself. Ivy painted 5 perfect, stylized figures carved into the bark, a mother, a grandmother, and 3 children, representing the stubborn survivors of Verkivka. It was real, resilient, and utterly defiant. The unveiling happened spontaneously. There was no official ceremony, just a handful of remaining residents and a small group of soldiers passing through on rotation who stopped their vehicles, stunned by the vision. The mural was breathtaking. It was a fusion of truth and aspiration, the raw scar tissue of the mill wall meeting the wild, blazing hope of the paint. Mrs. Khalid stood staring at the mural, tears tracking paths through the dust on her cheeks. "It is beautiful, Alina. But it is sad too. It remembers." "It has to remember," Alina said, pulling her close. "We can't rebuild the future if we lie about the foundation of the past. The oak tree is strong because it survived the fire." Ivy, standing beside Alina, looked up at her creation. The tank tracks were still in her memory, but now they were background noise. She had poured her anger and her truth into that tree, and it had given her a new kind of peace. The gold she used here wasn't just light, it was steel. Sage, who had contributed the flying bluebirds that circled the tree's crown, finally spoke without prompting, her voice clear and strong. "The birds fly away, but they always know how to come home." As the first heavy snow of deepest winter began to fall, painting gave way to teaching theory, history, and the tedious work of finding supplies. But the Palitra Nadii endured. Alina wasn't just running an art school, she was tending a small, fiery heart in the middle of a broken town. The children had not only learned to mix pigments, they had learned to mix grief with action, and fear with creation. They were no longer victims defined by the ruins around them, but artists defined by the colors they dared to lay down. Alina stood in the warm, lamplit annex, watching Ivy help Sage with a perspective drawing. Maxim's favorite yellow paint, the stubborn gold, was used routinely now, no longer special, but incorporated into every new vision. She realized what her husband meant about visualization. They weren't just painting a rebuilt town, they were creating the emotional, foundational template for it. The dust of Verkivka still settled on the windowsills, but now, beneath its gray layer, was a brilliant, defiant splash of color. The palette of hope, keeping the darkness at bay. Alina Petrov, the widow, the cleaner, the teacher, had not just honored Maxim's memory, she had turned sorrow into the most enduring form of art, resilience. And in the hearts of her students, the first bright colors of a new beginning had already begun to dry. That will be all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. Goodbye.